All right. So if you're an MMA fan, you probably remember a little while ago when Dana White started teasing this big, unbelievable fight that no one will see coming. I know for a second there, a lot of people thought it was going to be this completely out of nowhere boxing match between Conor McGregor and Logan Paul. And that fight has since been completely dispelled. More recently, Conor came out and just told what I believe to be probably the actual truth, that it was actually the UFC that was just not into the idea of doing that. And now, more recently, Dana has talked about this even more, providing some details and giving us some insight. And I think just through simple process of elimination, we can figure out exactly what this fight is going to be, or at least get close. So here's Dana White talking a little bit more about this fight, actually giving us some details instead of just telling us that it's going to be fucking awesome and we won't see it coming.
You have something in the works that we will never see coming for 2025. Can you give us just a hint?
What I was talking about in December, yeah, I would imagine it's probably going to happen, and it's going to happen in the fall. A fight that I'm working on.
Oh.
And we'll never see it coming.
Nope.
Now, I know those aren't exactly, giant, juicy details, but giving us a timeline gives us a really good look as to what this is going to be about. Because, just looking at the roster, looking at the champions, who's going to be available by then, and how out of nowhere is this matchup going to be? Just logically speaking, we can look right here at the rankings and understand who is going to be fighting who when it comes to the championship picture. And obviously, most big fights are main events, and most main events are title fights. When it comes to pretty much all of the divisions, there's not much left that's going to be exciting as far as matchups against the champion goes. And now there is one somewhat out of nowhere matchup that can be made when it comes to the title pictures. And that, of course, would be at women's bantamweight, a return of Amanda Nunes fighting either Juliana Pena for a trilogy or fighting Kayla Harrison. But realistically, that's not that much of an out of nowhere matchup. I think that when Kayla came to the UFC, that was the only fight that anybody was really talking about with her. And again, simple process of elimination. There's not really a lot of guys on the UFC roster that could fight anyone else on the UFC roster and have it be some out of nowhere fight, which has to mean that there is someone who is not an active UFC fighter right now that has to be involved in this fight. Now, at the end of last year, Saudi Arabia's Turki Al-Sheikh was playing a little coy when it comes to the question of getting involved in MMA. And he pretty much alluded to, or I think he might have just flat out said it in an interview, that his plans of getting involved in MMA involve one particular fight, and that is that he still wants to see Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones. Now, I know that there's an obvious problem with that, right? It is the fact that Francis Ngannou is currently a PFL fighter, but there's two things that we have to remember. Really, three things that we have to remember. First is that Francis only has one fight left on his PFL contract, and I don't know the specific terms of his agreement, if this has something to do with those boxing fights or whatever, or he might have just straight up signed a 2-fight MMA deal. Either way, Francis is one fight away from being free from his PFL contract, which means for Francis, he could take one fight, and PFL doesn't really have any high-level heavyweights to throw at him anyway. Chances are he gets through whoever fights him pretty quickly and leaves unscathed. Now as a free agent, has a little bit of negotiating power, and potentially puts himself in a position where he's willing to take a one-off UFC fight against Jon Jones or Tom Aspinall. If Jon Jones were to retire, Tom Aspinall has another very unique problem in that he has pretty much cleared out most of the division as the interim champ. So there's not that many interesting matchups for Tom right now anyway. And obviously, Jon Jones leaving the door wide open to the idea that he's probably going to retire and not take on another UFC fight. But as he said before, if he sticks around, he wants insane fuck you money. And if Turki Al-Sheikh, who is known for giving out fuck you money, if he wants to get his hands in this situation and make Dana maybe a little more okay with the idea of Francis taking a one-off fight, I think it could happen. And for the PFL's perspective, again, Francis doesn't have anyone to fight in the PFL right now. If I'm the PFL, I'd kind of be salivating at the opportunity for Francis to have a co-promoted fight. I know this is completely absurd, but a co-promoted fight where his last fight for his PFL contract is against the UFC's heavyweight champion. And Francis, who hits like a truck will always have a puncher's chance against anyone. And if he's able to get the job done, he could be the first guy to hold up 2 belts from 2 different promotions. And the PFL could have a legitimate claim to saying that they actually have the best heavyweight on the planet on the roster. So all that to say that it's actually more reasonable, more realistic than you might think, especially because, you know, if enough money's on the line in the world of combat sports, anything is possible. And that brings me to this, my final prediction. And I think that this is very realistic of what Dana White's big announcement for the fall is going to be. So recently, Conor McGregor attended the presidential inauguration and somehow got put in a bus with Logan Paul, Jake Paul, and Theo Von. And naturally, there was a whole bunch of back and forth shit talking going on. And things actually got a little interesting when Conor started calling those guys, you know, side jobs, ways for him to make a quick little bit of cash while he's not currently competing in the octagon. Logan quipping back that, Conor, you can't even do your real job. And in response, Conor kind of said something on camera that I'm not sure he was supposed to, but that's nothing new.
He was ambitious to me, you understand that? Side jobs, a little side job.
No,
yeah.
you can't even do your main job. How you gonna do a side job?
You know, that's what I'm afraid of November.
Simmer down, boys.
And you'll notice Conor basically just says that that's all settled for November. Now, I have a hard time believing that Dana White is talking about a huge fight this upcoming fall. Meanwhile, Conor's also going to be fighting in the fall, and these are somehow different fights. I think for sure this big fight in November is going to involve Conor. And then, as Dana White said, it's going to be something out of nowhere, something that no one's going to see coming. And again, when you analyze the UFC roster, we've already seen Conor versus Dustin. We know that Justin Gaethje already has a giant fight lined up where if he wins, good chance he fights for the belt. We know that there was already a insane like multi-year buildup for Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler, so that wouldn't be out of nowhere at all. And again, as I said before, if it's going to be something that no one sees coming, that no one can predict, probably going to involve someone who's not on the UFC roster. And again, if Conor was ready to fight last fall, and if he's going to be waiting all the way until this fall, I imagine there's got to be a pretty good reason for him to be waiting. So I think that the reason for the holdup, the reason it's going to take so long to happen, is because Conor's going to be fighting a guy not in the UFC roster currently, but it's going to be someone who at one point in time, for a long time, was. I think this big mystery fight is going to be Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz, the trilogy. It's a big fight that we've all known is a big fight forever, but with Nate Diaz no longer being in the UFC, and then Conor, you know, I mean, where do we even start with Conor, right? But I think now we're at a point where that's a fight that makes a lot of sense. I think you ignite one of the rivalries that really helped to blow up MMA in general, let alone the UFC. I think both guys would make it a very entertaining fight and one of the most entertaining build-ups we've seen in a while. And I think that fight is pretty much a guaranteed 1 million+ pay-per-view sales. And I imagine there's got to be some kind of red tape with Nate Diaz no longer being a UFC fighter. I don't know if he's going to have to re-enter the USADA pool, which is going to take about 6 months. And then you got to think about the slate of fights that are already set going forth for the next X amount of months. In November, International Fight Week, I think it makes all the sense in the world. But let me know in the comments below, what do you guys think this insane, out of nowhere mystery fight's going to be? And if it is Conor versus Nate, scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you to actually see that fight finally happen? Thanks for watching.